Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emily Chang and Marc Andreessen.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Marc, as well. I wanted to start with a word of congratulations because 20 years ago this week, Netscape, which you co-founded, launched. Can we get some applause for that? Ushering in the web as we know it. How does that feel?
It's fantastic. It is so extraordinary. We had a little bit of a glimmer that something might happen, that it might matter, and this internet thing might work out okay. It turned out it has, and it's just been extraordinary. The single most extraordinary thing to see is how many people have used it for so many different creative things. It's been unbelievable.
You've been incredibly productive since. You've started a little venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz. You've also tweeted 33,000 times. In 1 year.
Thank you.
Which is more than all three founders of Twitter combined.
Yes, that's true.
Since Twitter started,
that's true.
By the way.
And I really think the stock in the company should be rebalanced.
So we're going to reference some of your tweets throughout this conversation, and I wanted to start with this one, given the anniversary of Netscape. This is true. When I came to Silicon Valley in 1994, I thought I had missed all the opportunity, fun, excitement. It felt post-apocalyptic. Yeah. When did you realize you were wrong?
Well, it really took until 95, 96. It really took the internet taking off. So this is something, so a lot of people here will remember this, but some people are young and won't, is Silicon Valley had been on fire in the late 70s and in the 1980s with the PC and with software and with companies like Oracle taking off and Microsoft and so forth, and Adobe and Apple and all these local companies. And then the Valley crashed really hard in the late 80s. And actually, artificial intelligence was a really big bust. And then in the early 90s, there was the pen computing. Like it was the attempt to do the iPad, right, 20, 25 years earlier, and it just didn't work. It didn't work for Apple with the Newton, and it didn't work. There were like 60 venture capital-backed startups doing pen computing and tablets and sort of really early smartphones, and they just didn't work. And so the whole thing just was and then the country was in a big recession. And so, a lot of people were hurting, and it was generally bad times. And so I got here in January '94, and it was really dark. Like it was dark and sad. I mean, the real indicator is the big in thing was partnerships between the companies and city governments to try to figure out how to revitalize the economy. And that's when you know things are really, really bad, is when the cities get involved. And it felt really dim. And I think if you had done a poll in 1993 or 1994, would Silicon Valley ever come back, I think overwhelmingly people would have said no. Part of what happened was the internet and a whole bunch of other things, really hit. But the other thing that happened was, the thing that I learned was the talent, the latent talent, the number of people in the Valley who were unbelievably talented and qualified and skilled, who had been through the PC revolution and who had been through the early days of software, who just didn't have, there was no real thing for them to do. And the minute there was something to do, they all stood up and said, I want to be a part of that. And they all pitched in, and that became, everything that happened in the 1990s. And so for me, it was a real lesson in how the Valley and the technology industry more broadly is sort of self-renewing, self-revitalizing. Like, I don't think it ever stops. I think it just keeps going.
So for someone who comes to Silicon Valley today, have they missed all the excitement 20 years later?
Well, this is my big learning, is there's no way. Like, it feels today, it feels to me like 20 years of progress with the internet. It feels like we're just now starting to really get the payoff from all the hard work that we've all done over the last 2 decades. But my guess is in 20 years, we'll look back and we'll say, oh my God, like that was so primitive, that was so crude. So my favorite thing to do now is because this has been on my mind with the anniversary, is you go on YouTube, and there's a whole genre on YouTube of how to use the internet videos from like 1994 that aired on like local public television, or you could buy them like on CD-ROM, and they would tell you how to like hook up your modem. And they're awesome because, first of all, like just the clothing is just spectacular. But then it's just like the computers look like they're just Stone Age. I mean, it's just, it's the super big monitors, and it's like they'll have like a 386. They'll be running Windows 3.1, and everything will be super slow, and you'll be able to hear the hard drive, through the microphone. And you're just like, oh my God, like that was in the ancient past. And it was not that long ago that that's what things were actually like. And so today, we all have all these gadgets. We all carry around the iPhones and the iPads and all these things. I think in 20 years, we're just going to get laughed at. we're going to laugh at ourselves, and our kids are for sure going to laugh at us for how crude and primitive everything will look in retrospect.
You're on a few boards, including eBay, HP, Facebook. eBay and HP recently decided to split up. You said they made those decisions independently. Symantec is doing it as well now. Why is this happening?
Yeah, so there's actually been a whole series, and actually, EMC is another one that's sort of under the gun from a hedge fund to do the same thing. So I think my view is there's going to be more fundamental structural industry change in the next 5 years than there has been in the last 20. I think it's actually a consequence of what we've been talking about, which is the internet works now. Mobile and smartphone work. Like all these technologies work and they're pervasive in people's lives. And so you have a lot of new companies like Salesforce in the last 15, 20 years that have kind of grown up in this new environment. And then you have these really big, really important, like franchise technology companies that have been around for 30 or 40 or 50 or 80 years that still are like doing incredibly important work, are incredibly big, employ a very large number of people. And so my prediction, the prediction I made the other day is I think that basically every technology company that's more than 20 years old will almost certainly break up. Will almost certainly break up, like literally split apart.
Define every.
I think basically every. Like I don't know, it'll take time. But I think you go right down the list.
You mentioned Oracle.
Yeah, so I won't specifically. I won't want to sit here and like whiteboard specific.
Please do that.
Get in too much trouble. But well, here's the two big reasons, right? So two big reasons. So number one, they're all super cheap, and this is something that I think is widely misunderstood, which is there's sort of this conventional view that there's always a new tech bubble, and I think what's actually the case is all the sort of large sort of older technology companies are all really cheap. Even Google and Apple are trading at really low PEs, like low double-digit PEs, price-earnings ratios, and then the really big ones like Oracle and Cisco and some of these others, many of them are trading at single-digit price earnings, and a lot of these companies have tons of cash on the balance sheet, and that's what's attracting all these activists. Like, right, the activists come in because the companies are cheap, not because the companies are expensive. And then the other side is the industry change, which is the industry is now changing so fast that if you're a if you're one of these big sort of technology conglomerates and you're in all these different lines of business, you have competition in every single line of your business from all these new startups, right, and all these new companies. And your ability to fight a 5 or 6 front war at the same time is just really challenging. And so at some point, I think you want to split up because you want to be able to get more aggressive and nimble, which means going to having smaller independent companies.
So you mentioned old. I mean, would Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, would they fall in the category of every?
I don't want to name. I don't want to specifically. I would say over 20 years. Now, obviously, some of the newer companies, including Salesforce, but also Google and Facebook and others, are actually are growing very fast. And so, I think a lot of companies will get larger through this period. But if they're great, more than 20 years old, they probably benefit by being broken up. They'll probably benefit from being broken up, and many of them will probably be forced to break up if they don't do it voluntarily, which is why I feel so good. I'm involved at both HP and eBay, and I feel so good about both of those moves because I feel like, especially actually in HP's case, it's really getting ahead of what would probably happen anyway.
So it's not a sign of defeat. It's not a sign innovation is dead or lost.
So it's a sign of change, right? It's a sign of evolution. The industry is changing. It's a sign that the technology is changing. It's a sign that there is the opportunity to do more and better if you're smaller and more nimble.
You mentioned Salesforce, and Salesforce turned 15 years old this year, I believe. Salesforce is a big acquirer. How does Salesforce keep growing in that way without going down that path, the breakup path?
Yeah, so here's our kind of fundamental, how we at our venture firm kind of think about this, which is we sort of think there's sort of two kinds of companies in the world. There's kind of normal companies, and then there's technology companies, and they're different. And so a normal company is kind of in the business that it's in, so it makes what it makes. And so a soup company makes soup. Campbell's Soup in 1950 and 2010, makes soup. Car companies make cars, insurance companies sell insurance. Like for normal companies, you can just kind of say that's what they do, and they do it year in, year out. Technology companies are different. Technology companies, by definition, whatever they make and sell today is going to be obsolete in 5 years. Nobody's going to buy it. Like whatever it is, nobody's going to buy it. The products are all going to be new. And so as a consequence, a technology company is in the business of innovation, right? The products that it already has in the market, kind of by definition, are already becoming obsolete. It's all the new products that they're going to come out with in the next 5 years that are going to determine how well they do, right? And so the real test for technology companies is how do they make sure that they stay on the leading edge, that they constantly have a product pipeline that's going to result in having ever sort of more attractive products. How do they do acquisitions in a way to be able to to add other products to their portfolio? And you can kind of tell. I don't want to pick on companies, but like you can feel it. it's one of those things where it's like, you can tell there are some companies in the industry, you see, I mean, you go online in the morning and it's like, company X has a new product coming out and everybody's excited. And product Y, company Y either doesn't have a product coming out or nobody's excited. And you can tell the difference. And I think that is the fundamental thing. And then of course, for a company like Salesforce with a leader like Marc, and with so much opportunity in front of it to be able to build, new products for its customers and new value, there's such a huge opportunity. And I know Salesforce has a very deep pipeline, so I would assume would do very well.
From a leadership perspective, you mentioned Marc Benioff. We've seen Larry Ellison step down from the CEO suite. Is there a changing of the guard happening here?
Well, so this is, there is in a bunch of companies. So I think Oracle, I think it's possible that actually nothing just changed. So I think that might have had more to do with Larry's, the number of papers Larry has to sign and the number of meetings he has to go to. But he does still have, product development still works for Larry, so it'll probably be the same Oracle for quite a while. Obviously, Microsoft went through a very big transition when Bill stepped down. You do see these companies going through these transitions. Another theory that we have that we use a lot at our firm is the particular kind of role and psychology of this idea of the founder CEO. And so we think that the founder CEOs, we think are magic. We think that basically it's like 90% of the really great franchise companies in the industry got built by their founders running the companies, often for decades. And not just in this generation, like everybody looks at, now Larry Page or looks at Mark Zuckerberg or so forth. But if you think about IBM, it was Thomas Watson. If you think about, Hewlett-Packard, it was Hewlett and Packard. If you think about Intel, Intel was the company got really lucky. They had 3 founders, all of whom could be CEO. They ran the company for 40 years. The great companies get built by their founders. And so there is something really, really magical to having somebody like Mark, not just the founder, but running the company. By the way, that said, not every company has founders who can be CEO, and not every founder can be CEO forever. And so the sort of other trick to all this stuff is how do you be a non-founder CEO and still do the things that the great founding CEOs are able to do, which comes right back to innovation. The great non-founding CEOs are equally good at innovation and are very, very good at getting companies to innovate. It's just there aren't very many of those. And that's a big test for companies, especially when the founder steps down.
Let's talk a bit about the next generation. You recently sounded the alarm about startups. And another tweet storm, there's a few here, so bear with me. New founders in the last 10 years have only been in the environment where money is always easy to raise at higher valuations. That will not last, in all caps. Yep. When the market turns, and it will turn, we will find out who's been swimming without trunks on. Many high burn rate companies will vaporize, all caps. There are exceptions to all this, but if you're reading this, you're almost certainly not one. And then a single word, worry.
Worry, yes.
What are you worried about?
Yeah, so this goes back to, we started out by talking about the valley being kind of, blasted out and post-apocalyptic in 1993. Well, by 2003, 2004, the valley was back to being, post-apocalyptic. And so the current generation of founders who are building the companies, the companies that are raising large amounts of money, that are in the headlines a lot, that have gotten founded in the last 10 years, they generally got founded between 2003, call it 2003, 2008, 2009, in a period of time when everything was horribly depressed, right? And so everybody was in a terrible mood, again, about technology. It was actually quite hard to raise money, especially in the 2002, 2003, 2004. Valuations were very low. If you go back in time and if you look at the deals venture capitalists were doing back in like 2003, they were like at a fraction of the valuations people are doing today, just because the environment was depressed. And then tech recovered. And so for the last 10 years, tech has been recovering, right? Especially early stage tech. Venture capital has been recovering, growth equity has been recovering, and you've seen the rise of a whole bunch of these new franchise companies. Salesforce obviously worked, Google worked, VMware worked, and then you've seen these new companies like Facebook and Twitter that have become very successful. And so generally now for 10 years off a very low base, it's just gotten easier and easier to raise money. And so as a consequence, you start to get used to being able to raise money, and you start to get used to being able to raise money always at a higher valuation. And maybe you can't raise it anymore in the US, but if you get on the plane and you fly to Europe, you can raise it. And then next time, maybe you get on the plane and fly to Asia. And then pretty soon you find yourself in Antarctica looking for investors further and further out on the fringe. And it gets harder and harder. And then at some point, if you've got a company that is just burning huge amounts of money, at some point you can't raise that next round. And that's it's a real problem, right? Because basically, if you're an iBurn company and you can't raise a round of financing, you either literally go bankrupt, right? Or you have to do a down round, which is, can be very damaging to the company's kind of internal morale. Or you might have to fire sale the company if you can get somebody to buy you. But the problem there is there aren't that many buyers of companies that are burning lots of cash, because nobody says, boy, I'd like to add his burn rate to my profits. That would be great. And so it's just, no, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, this is a time of the creation of some incredibly important and vital and successful new technology companies. And so Facebook from 0 to $10 billion in revenue in 10 years from a standing start, and what Twitter has been able to do, and what Salesforce has been able to do, and what Google's been able to do. And so you look at the other side of it, and you're like, like when it works really, really well. And are the investors who invested in Facebook, hundreds of millions of dollars of private financing into Facebook while Facebook was burning money, are they happy they did it? Yeah, they're thrilled. Like, they made a killing. And so, like, this isn't like universal, like everybody's going to go under, but this is sort of an observation that, generally speaking, you want to be very aware of the risk involved in burning large amounts of cash, especially, in out years. I think it's going to go much back into fashion in the next 5 years, is the idea of actually being able to grow and make money at the same time, which is how actually most of the great high-growth companies in the past got built. And so the main thing we're just encouraging care and responsibility and just a deeper awareness of risk.
Why stop short of using the word bubble?
Yeah, well, so we don't think it's a bubble.
Why not?
Well, there's a couple reasons we don't think it's a bubble. So first of all, every bubble in human history that's called a bubble by historians had widespread public participation, right? So you always had a frenzy. You always had, the proverbial shoeshine boys or the taxi drivers or whoever, completely hyper-enthusiastic about putting every spare penny into stocks. And like, there's none of that today. Like, individual money has actually been coming out of stocks now for a very long time. Also, publicly traded technology companies, again, are cheap. For the last 5 years, technology companies have actually traded at a discount to industrials, which has not happened since the 1970s. And so if anything, in the public market, there's been a tech depression where people were traumatized by the 2000 crash and then traumatized by the 2008 crash, and they're just like, I just don't want this stuff anywhere near me. And you see days like today where everybody gets freaked out and immediately, for those of you that missed it, Netflix announced disappointing numbers of new subscriber acquisition, and the stock drops 25% in a day, right? People are like hair trigger to like get out of these stocks. And so you don't see it in the public market. And then even on the private market, again, you look and you say there have been companies like Facebook that have generated $200 billion of market value in 10 years. Like, when these things work, they work really well. And so I don't, valuations are running a little bit hot, but I don't think there's some like mass mispricing that's happened here. I think it has more to do, I highlighted more literally cash burn, which is how much money are you raising, how much money are you spending.
So how does this cycle play out then? If it's not a bubble and the bubble doesn't pop, what does vaporizing look like? Mass vaporizing, vaporization.
Well, vaporizing. I mean, literally, it's there's an old quote. The old Valley people will tell you the line people used to use was cash is more important than your mother. I don't know that was ever actually true, but it certainly made the point. And so it's just a question of how much money do you raise, how much money do you spend, can you keep raising money all the time? At what point should businesses go profitable? Well, so here's another thing that's happened, which is everybody's internalized the Amazon lesson, right? The Amazon lesson is you never need to go profitable, right? The Amazon lesson is your company's worth $200 billion and you're a genius, and you never, if you ever generate a penny of profit, you've made a mistake. And people look at that and they're like, okay, I can get away with that too. Like that's what I can do too. And they're just wrong. They just like fundamentally like don't understand how Amazon is able to pull that off, and they don't have the same business dynamics that Amazon has. And they're just not going to be able to do the same thing. And I think people just need to know, like, it's not actually that easy.
But it's not going to end in doom and gloom?
Well, who knows? I mean, asteroids, who can tell? I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody knows the future at that level. The optimism that I have comes back to what I said, which is when these companies work, they work really, really well. They start, Salesforce is a prime example of this. They start small, it looks like a radical idea, it looks like something that will never work, and nobody will ever want what they're selling, and then you sort of wake up 15 years later and like, oh my God, giant company, huge number of customers are thrilled, catalyzing huge industry changes, huge amounts of, money, revenue, and market value, being created. Here's the other thing is there's no reason why the new generation of technology companies can't be larger than the previous generation, because the world is so much more global and connected today, right? The market sizes are so much larger. And then the other thing is technology is moving into so many other categories than it used to. Like, we have companies bringing technology to healthcare, into real estate, into transportation, financial services, education, in really powerful ways that weren't possible, 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. And so there's no reason why there can't be a very large and healthy and diverse set of very powerful and very valuable technology companies, It's just like, how would we ruin that? How would we have that not be the case? We would overdo it.
Right.
We would burn our way through every dollar of cash on the planet and self-destruct.
How is this playing out in your portfolio? Because obviously you have companies that you think are the exception. Yeah. You're an investor in Airbnb, which has a $10 billion valuation, Pinterest, a $5 billion valuation. How are you balancing making those investments and practicing what you tweet, scaling back or being careful?
Well, to be clear, all of our companies are the exception, just to be clear. So I'm talking entirely about other people's companies, right? I guess I would say the devil's in the details. So I would say a couple of things, which is one is this discussion is the same discussion we're having with our companies. One of the reasons I went ahead and said what I said publicly is because this is the same conversation we have with all of our CEOs. Like I said, it's a cautionary conversation. It's not a conversation that says stop spending or have smaller goals or anything like that. It's just it's a conversation that says be aware, learn from history, have an appropriate sense of risk, have good discipline. And then the rest of it is the devil's in the details, which is we have companies, I mean, you said Airbnb as an example, which is unambiguously a gigantic commercial success. And the business is growing really fast, and it's really big, and it's going to be gigantic. And so, for a company like that, you want them to go take the global market as fast as they possibly can. There are other companies where it's a little bit more of a balance, and you want to see prudence, and you want to see caution, and you want to see that that they're staging the activities and they're staging the spending in the right way. The other thing I'll just highlight, and we kind of harangue them about this all the time as well, is just extravagance is probably a little bit over the top. It's one thing, a company gets to be like at Salesforce's success level and it wants to throw all these huge parties and have a great time. It's like, okay, fine. When you're burning $50 million a quarter, as a new startup, maybe not having Bruno Mars play the concert. Maybe we could have the regular water and not the coconut water.
And they all love coconut water.
We all love the coconut water. We've all gotten used to it. Coconut water has become a basic human right in San Francisco. And maybe the masseuses could just come in on Wednesdays and Fridays, right? Not 5 days a week. So it's gotten to be a bit much. And so we have that conversation too, which is, I admire, we talk a lot about there's sort of this legend in Silicon Valley, or this kind of ghost story that people tell. It's called the Oedipus complex, sort of a play on words, which is basically, there's this very high correlation between, these companies get all excited and everybody loves them, and then they build these big new shining headquarters, right? And these offices, and they're just gorgeous headquarters, and there's there's dogs everywhere, and there's the fancy bikes and the whole thing, and the swimming pools and everything. And there's a very high correlation to building the fancy headquarters and then falling off a cliff, right, and collapsing as a business, right? And it's sort of like peak ego, right, relative to the fact that the company actually does have to work for a living. And so we're just one of the things we talk to companies about is just the alternate model is the Amazon model, the Jeff Bezos model, which is you want a desk, it's a recycled door on 2 sawhorses, go crazy. And so we're much more on the side of let's get out the sawhorse desks and maybe tamp down a little bit on all the spending.
You had a spirited back and forth with the activist investor Carl Icahn last week. You called him evil Captain Kirk. He said some things. I wonder, though, do some of these activist investors actually have the same concerns you do?
So the activists come in, and by the way, I think there are good activists and bad activists. And I talked actually a lot last week about Ralph Whitworth, who's the activist we've worked with on Hewlett-Packard, who I'm a huge fan of and would be delighted to talk about, but has been very, very helpful to us at HP. The activists come in on the other side. The activists come in when the companies are, literally, it's like these cases we've been talking about. The companies come in on the other side when the companies are generally older, generally larger, and actually a large big part of it is the companies just get big. And then the other thing is activists come in when it gets cheap. In fact, I guess probably that's the single biggest thing to say about activists, which is I think activists are good or bad. I think they're a result, not a cause. They're a consequence of companies being very cheap on the stock market. They're a consequence of companies, in some cases needing to restructure or needing to react to market changes. And so, they're very entertaining, and they're always a big story. I think the heart of it is the substance of how the company is run. And I think the activist is a little bit of a sideshow to the sort of core question of how is the company being run?
So is there a disconnect between Wall Street and Silicon Valley? Is there a fundamental misunderstanding?
I think in the long run, I don't think in the long run there's a misunderstanding. I mean, look, the fact that Wall Street is Amazon is the case study for that there's actually a lot of alignment, which is, so this is actually maybe interesting. So the way Wall Street looks at Amazon is not that it never generates any profit. The way Wall Street looks at Amazon is that Amazon is a portfolio of businesses, and the old ones generate tons of profit. And then Jeff Bezos is such a great CEO that they trust him to allocate all the profit generated off the old businesses into new businesses, right? And so they almost view Amazon as a giant venture capital fund that has sort of, or like a Berkshire Hathaway kind of thing, that has some old cash-rich businesses and some new cash-burning businesses. But Jeff built over 20 years the credibility on Wall Street to be able to tell investors, let me take the capital that I'm generating and let me redeploy it. And I'll be able to grow, I'll be able to generate investment gains more than if I just gave the cash back to you and you just invested in another stock. So it can be done. Like it can be done. Other companies are able to do it, and that's good. That, however, is not the circumstance for especially a lot of these older technology companies, or Wall Street, I think, has gotten very short-term in nature and very much has this attitude of just give me the cash back. Like, this is something you hear a lot when you talk to public market investors, which is all these tech CEOs are like full of themselves. They all think they can invent all these new products. They all think they can do these acquisitions, and they're just wrong. And just give us the money back. So buybacks is a really interesting topic. So American corporations last year bought back $450 billion of their own stock in the S&P 500. So people talk about venture capital like being bubble or whatever. Buybacks were $475 billion last year. Venture capital in total was $30 billion, right? So buybacks were more than 10x all of venture capital. Well, to me, which raises the question of, okay, shareholders got back $475 billion. Okay, then to do what with, right? Where is that money actually going to go? And right now what's happening is that money's all going to bonds, right? Which is why yields are so low. And so the stock market generally is extremely risk sensitive and that's why I say it's not a bubble. Like the stock market is very freaked and is very easily freaked additionally right now. And so it's not a very hospitable time to be a public tech company, which is why a lot of these companies are so cheap. But again, I think it's all kind of a sideshow, which is the main thing is like, how is the company actually run? Take any company and kind of say, okay, how's it actually run? How are the products actually? What does the new product pipeline actually look like? What does the talent base look like? Is the company getting smarter over time or dumber over time? Like those are the things that actually matter.
I'm curious about your thoughts on payments because this seems to be an area that is wide open. And now you have Apple Pay, Google Wallet, PayPal, Bitcoin. How do you see the digital payments and mobile payments race playing out?
Yeah. So this is another really big thing. So the global financial services industry is just gigantic, and it's really fundamental in people's lives. It hasn't changed that much in 20 years. We still go online and we buy something and we put in a credit card number and we go over the credit card rails. And if somebody steals the credit card number, they go buy a bunch of stuff with our credit card. And then there's fraud, and then there's a chargeback, and then the rest of us all eat it in the form of these giant fees. And so, the system really has not changed significantly in 20 years. This is another area where I think there will be more change in the next 5 years than there were in the previous 20. And there's two big drivers of that change. One is Apple Pay, and the other is Bitcoin. The Apple Pay is the thing that is freaking out all the financial services companies right now. Like the financial services companies have been kind of like, whatever, internet, okay, and we'll just credit cards, they'll work fine on the internet, it's all good. Apple showing up to the party and saying we're going to now be in the center of payments has caused kind of a collective heart attack. And there are payments companies that are aligned with Apple that are all like, yeah, we figured it out. And then there are payments companies that aren't, that are basically having a stroke in real time and trying really hard to figure out what the implications of Apple Pay are. So there's going to be a lot of change, I think, catalyzed by that. And then, by the way, not just Apple, but presumably Google, everybody assumes that Google will respond to Apple Pay, with a Google Pay that'll work much the same way with Android.
Well, Google Wallet hasn't really worked out, so why didn't it? And how optimistic are you that Apple can get it right?
So this is what's so interesting about Apple Pay. Apple Pay is viewed by the payments industry as revolutionary, but it's also it is the most consistent with the existing payment system of any of these new systems yet. It doesn't require what's actually surprising about Apple Pay is how many things don't change with Apple Pay. Like you put in your credit card, right?
Are you saying it's not that innovative?
Well, it's innovative, but in a way that's very consistent with the status quo. It's very clever. It's very clever. I acknowledge the disconnect in what I just said. It's very clever. It's very cleverly done. It does not. If anything, its big selling point is it doesn't require massive structural change. So the typical problem with a new payment system is a chicken and egg problem, right? Which is this is the problem credit cards had when they first came out 50 years ago. It's the problem that Bitcoin is fighting its way through today, which is if everybody has a way to pay, and then all the merchants take it, then it's all great. But until you have universal acceptance on both sides, nobody uses it, right? And so it's a network effects problem. Like you have to get through the chicken and egg problem to get to the other side, universal adoption, right? Feast or famine. And so Apple Pay is very cleverly calibrated to basically skip right through that by being very much in alignment with the status quo payments companies, credit card companies. It sort of plugs right into the existing system. I mean, it inserts Apple into the middle of the existing system, which is why they're also freaked out. Bitcoin is the exact kind of inverse of all that. Bitcoin is truly radical, cryptocurrency more broadly, truly radical, truly revolutionary, fundamental breakthrough in computer science, completely different way to do transaction processing, potentially a replacement for a very large amount of the status quo, but has the big chicken and egg challenge, which is until consumers have Bitcoin and until merchants take Bitcoin, like you're just not going to see a huge amount of transaction volume. And so what we say from our standpoint is in the long run, Bitcoin is by far the most innovative and radical thing. Like it's the thing that will actually have the big impact over 20 years. But Apple Pay is the thing that's going to have the big impact in the next 3 years. And the combination of those two is going to cause enormous change.
You've been a huge supporter of Bitcoin. The price has plummeted.
And come right back up.
Do you allow for the fact that you could be wrong about Bitcoin?
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. No, so look, Bitcoin for us is very much, this is the saving grace about the venture, so we're venture capitalists, I think like a venture capitalist now. The nature of venture capital is we make 10 bets, we assume 5 of them are gonna go straight to zero. Like nobody yet, we keep all looking for it, nobody has figured out how to only invest in the good startups. And so we keep trying. So it's the nature of our business. We refer to it as a slugging percentage business, right? Which is, it's not a batting average business. It's not a question of how right you are, or how often you're right. It's a question of when you're right, how right are you? And I would put Bitcoin squarely in that kind of bet. And if anybody's thinking about buying Bitcoin for their own portfolios or getting involved in a Bitcoin startup, this is also the way to think about it, which is Bitcoin may or may not work. And frankly, I don't think anybody knows one way or the other. But if it does work, it could be profound, right? It could be profound and revolutionary and gigantic. And so you discount the risk and return kind of in that way. And so I'm completely enthusiastic to take that. Right? I think that's a classic venture capital risk to take. I'm enthusiastic about taking it. People who understand that risk, should feel very good about taking it. That said, underneath that, the thing I am quite confident about is that the cryptocurrency concept itself is going to become really vitally important. I think it will be in the form of Bitcoin, but even if it's not Bitcoin, it will be something else. And even if it's not this year, it'll be in 5 years or 10 years, like it will happen, and it will be a very big deal. It is a true advance in technology. And so from that standpoint, I both do care about what happens in the short term, because we have to live in the short term, but I also have tremendous faith of what's going to happen in the long run.
A lot's been made of the power of the sharing economy in companies like Uber and Lyft, which I know you're an investor in. You recently tweeted, perhaps the single biggest key enabler for the sharing gig 1099 economy in the US is the Affordable Care Act of 2010, AKA Obamacare.
Yeah.
I know you've been a Republican donor. Some Republicans want Obamacare repealed. Yeah. What would you say to them?
Well, this is what's so fascinating. So this really is entertaining. So, I think it was BuzzFeed just wrote a story basically pointing out that the Obama administration has refused to market Obamacare on what is probably its greatest strength, which is it makes it far easier to switch employers, right? If your health care is not tied to your employer, then you can switch jobs anytime you want, or you can live life as an independent contractor, have complete freedom in what you do, and you still have the same benefits that you used to have a full-time job, to be able to have. And so the question, of course, that gets raised is, well, why hasn't administrations had such a hard time kind of convincing people Obamacare is good? Why haven't they marketed it that way? So I think it goes to this really fundamental question of the definition of what work is, like especially in America and especially in the sort of modern times, which is we sort of have this idea, and we all live this. We sort of have this idea that the sort of ideal version of work is a career at a company, right? A career, basically a lifetime employment, right? And so out of school, whether it's high school or college, I go to work for a company, General Motors or IBM or one of these companies, and I work there for 50 years. Right, and then they pat me on the head, give me the gold watch, I go fishing. Like that's, and that's like this idealized model. And by the way, it was great for the people who had it, who were happy living in that world. Couple of problems with it. One is a lot of people never liked, the idea of working for one company for 50 years, a lot of people would throw themselves off the roof. So like a lot of people actually, especially in a room like this, are not necessarily gonna be huge fans of that. Second problem is that career path was never available to most people, right? And so if you were female or black or gay or Latino or disabled or from the wrong country or the wrong ethnicity or the wrong religion, like you didn't get on that career path. And so it was actually like a fairly exclusionary kind of way to go. And then, of course, the third problem is it basically collapsed in the 1970s, right? Which is, it turned out it was basically just a moment in time thing from the 50s to the 70s, and then starting in the 70s, the car companies and all these other companies started doing layoffs, and that's kind of, for the last 40 years, there's been huge anxiety about work because you can't rely on this long-term career path. And of course, in that world, you got your benefits from the company, and so if you were on this career path, you had the benefits, you had healthcare, you could provide healthcare for your family, and if you didn't, like, who knew, like, do you know? Do you know if you're gonna be able to take care of your family? In the new world, right, the other way of looking at work is forget all that. The new way of looking at work is I want to be able to seize opportunities. And so I want to be able to join a hot startup. I want to be able to start a company. I want to be able to contract or consult. If I'm a kid out of school, I don't know what I want to do, so I'll be a Lyft or Uber driver, and I'll do some, I'll pick up stuff for Postmates. And if I want to, work this afternoon to make money, I'll punch the button on my phone. And if I want to sit and play video games, I'll do that. Or even just in a normal like career path, you might actually work for 5 or 6 or 7 companies for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years at a time. And so the good news about that is like, our ability to be dynamic in our lives, our ability to move around, right, our ability to, get new experiences, to be able to start companies, is greatly advanced. But then you have this underlying question of like, okay, how do I provide for my family and how do I have benefits? And Obamacare is like this huge breakthrough in like, okay, you're going to be covered. Like you're going to be covered with health insurance. It's just the nostalgic pull for the old path is so intense that nobody kind of wants to say out loud that the other way is actually good and probably better. And that it turns out, even if you hate Obamacare as sort of government takeover of the healthcare system, you should still love it because it makes it possible for people to pursue their own dreams as opposed to getting tied to one job.
Speaking of healthcare, you and Laura, your wife, have been giving big donations to Stanford Hospital, and do you have an update on that and why that's important?
Yeah. So I just tweeted about this, as there's a bunch of information online. So in 2000, and this is really on my mind because of everything that Mark has done here at UCSF. So the UCSF build, Benioff Children's Hospital, is just absolutely extraordinary. I'm also equally proud of what Stanford is doing. And I think it's actually what Stanford is doing is underappreciated. I think it hasn't been marketed as well. Which is, so my wife and I are big donors to the emergency department in particular, but more than that, we're building at Stanford a brand new hospital. And it's a nearly $2 billion project, including already $600 million of philanthropic contributions. And actually, the other thing people don't know about it is a lot of the contributions come from big companies in the Valley. And so HP and eBay and Oracle and Intel and Intuit and Adobe and a bunch of others have donated a large percentage of the $600 million to build this new hospital. And it's going to be revolutionary. It's going to be a brand new state-of-the-art academic medical center, incredible complex care, cancer and all these really sort of serious conditions. And then it's also where my wife and I are involved is the emergency department, which is really the sort of backstop health system for kind of everybody in the Bay Area. And Stanford is, between San Francisco and San Jose, Stanford is where you go for an ER. And so it's just, I think it's just a tremendous project. It'll open in 2018. So if you want to drive through Stanford, if you can drive through Stanford, there's traffic all over the place because they're building it right in the middle of the campus.
Not too different from.
Not too different than San Francisco, but it's going to be tremendous.
Now, there's been a conversation in San Francisco going on about inequality and the responsibility of the tech community. You mentioned tech companies are part of the Stanford Hospital project. Mark Benioff has been adamant that tech companies need to do more. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I think that's basically true. Now there's some puts and takes to it. So one is a lot of the new startups are just they're just new. They're just brand new. And so Mark and my wife, who spoke yesterday, also makes a point that there are things that the young startups can do. But a big part of this is what the big companies do and the sort of maturation of companies when they go from being startups to being big companies and kind of stepping up on their responsibilities. And so I think that's a really big deal.
What about when it comes to inclusion and diversity, something else that you and Laura have been giving to, just in the last week? Yeah. Why is inclusion important in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so this is something we did an announcement. I'll just recap real quick. We did an announcement a week ago into 3 organizations that are working on inclusion and bringing more people into the Valley from underrepresented groups. So I kind of have a very optimistic view on this, and then I think that there's a challenge that can be addressed. So the pessimistic view is that technology is sort of inherently exclusionary. Like this is just like a bunch of white male nerds, and women aren't welcome, and black people aren't welcome, and there's something kind of wrong with tech. I don't actually believe that. I believe the opposite. I believe tech is inherently inclusionary. Tech wants to bring people in. Tech wants to include as many people as possible. The reason I'm so confident about that is because of the incredible coverage, the incredible people in Silicon Valley from the incredible number of countries. And so any company you go into in the Valley, any group that you go to, like you got people from 40, 60, 80, 100 different countries. You get these just incredible, kind of spreads of people's backgrounds and experiences. And so, enormous amount of representation, obviously, from countries like India and China, but also from countries all over the world, Russia and Latin America, South America, and on and on and on. And so there's something about the culture that I think already is very inclusionary. The challenge is we are still underrepresented when it comes especially to women, and then in the US when it comes to African Americans and Latinos.
Should women ask for raises if they think they deserve one?
Yes, they should. Yes. I don't care what anybody says. I think women should ask for raises. I'm a fan. I think these are solvable problems. In particular, I think these are solvable problems in two different ways. So one is pipeline, which is there just are not, for example, with women, like women are only 15% of computer science graduates in the US, which is just simply too low. And so we have to get more girls and women into computer science, and we have to go early to be able to do that. And there's a bunch of efforts to be able to do that that are very exciting. And then the other is access, which is network. Which is how do you plug in, right? The great thing about Silicon Valley is if you know people in Silicon Valley, they're incredibly helpful, and they'll pull you in, and they'll show you opportunities, and they'll connect you, and you can raise money, and there's all this stuff. And if you're not connected, like how do you plug in? Like how do you get the leg up from getting plugged into the network? And so the three organizations that we're funding are working on both sides of that, both the pipeline part and the access part. And I think if we really bear down on both sides of that, I think we can actually move the needle on this pretty fast.
I'd like to talk a little bit now about the next 5-10 years in Silicon Valley and ask you a couple of future of questions. So I wanted to start with television because I know you love watching television, and I work in television, so I'm selfishly interested in what you have to say. What is the future of television?
Yeah, so I think it was actually announced this morning. HBO announced this morning that you will now be able to subscribe to HBO without being a cable customer, which for those of us, there we go, see? I always maintained that people wanted that, and then everybody in Hollywood told me it would never happen. And now it's just obvious. I mean, it's just obvious. If you're HBO, it's just obvious. You want to go get all these customers. And so I think there's an incredibly rosy look. I mean, I think the big thing is I think the media industry overall is going to grow a lot in the next 10 years. I think video is going to grow tremendously. I think television in the form of everything from live television all the way through to nonfiction content, news and so forth, documentaries, all the way through to fiction, drama, comedies. It's all going to grow a lot. The reason I'm so confident on that is because the number of people who can receive streaming video around the world now is like 2 billion people, on its way to 5 billion people by the end of the decade, right? Like you view the endpoint of video as everybody with a smartphone, and there's just so many more people that are going to have a smartphone than ever had any other form of ability to connect. And so the market size is going to grow enormously. Quality is way up. Like it's amazing what's happened, in the quality of television in the last 10 years. It's like it's the golden age of content. The challenge is you have this old economic structure with broadcast and cable and the bundle and prices that rise 15 or 20% a year, and everybody's paying for channels that they don't actually want. I think that changes now very fast. I think that's now a melting ice cube, and I think that changes very fast. And so I think in the future, it's either you want to watch something, you just Google it and you go straight to it, or you go on YouTube and you just go straight to it. Or new bundles, Netflix, I think, if you're ever going to buy Netflix stock, I would never recommend buying it, but on the day it's dropped 25%, it might be worth thinking about. I think Netflix could have 1 billion subscribers, by sometime in the early 2020s. Like, I don't think there's any reason why it can't be just absolutely gigantic. And then Amazon will be very big, I think, and there will be there'll be all these other, sort of the new aggregators, the new bundlers will get extremely large.
What is the future of Apple under Tim Cook? And will Apple be a big player in television? Yeah, so it looks incredibly promising. It looks extremely promising. The iPhone 6 is obviously a huge hit, and is going to be extremely successful. And Apple's gaining strength. This is sort of what I talked about earlier. Is you kind of get this. You can kind of feel it. Like, is the company gaining strategic strength or losing it? And you can just feel with Apple like they're gaining strength. And so I think they're going to do extraordinarily well. The interesting thing about Apple with TV is Apple keeps refusing to build a TV, right? And everybody keeps predicting that there will be the Apple TV you put on your wall, and they don't build it. And I think there's a bunch of different reasons for it. But I think the big one is I believe the big reason they don't build a TV is it goes back to the power of the smartphone, which is
Smartphone upgrade cycle is like 2 years. Like you basically get a new smartphone every 2 years. Like even if you don't do anything else in your life, you get a new smartphone. And then like it's the most important consumer product, probably in history. And then the upgrade cycles actually are shrinking. And so more and more people are now upgrading once a year. And potentially as these phones keep advancing, you could get the upgrade cycle below a year. I think what Apple's figured out is the upgrade cycles for TVs are like 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And so I think what that means is it's just not that attractive relative to the smartphone to build something that people don't, when they won't buy a new one every year. The other conclusion from that, though, is the TV then sort of effectively is faded. It's going to become a dumb peripheral to the smartphone, right? The smartphone will be the center of your media universe, and you'll be able to watch everything on it. And then if you have a big screen nearby, you'll use Apple Play or Chromecast or one of these things, and you'll beam to the TV. But the TV will be the dumb kind of recipient of the content. And I think they think that that's a low-margin business that other people can pursue.
What is the future of Elon Musk?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously he's going to build the Iron Man suit. I mean, I think it's obvious. And then obviously he's going to, in the suit, obviously he's going to fly to Mars. So he has some work to do between here and there. There's some basic conventions he still has to master. He is just absolutely extraordinary. There's three sort of founders who I think are, really revolutionizing. We're a lucky industry. We've got all these people who are, incredibly well known, who have built these amazing companies, and Marc is certainly one of those. And then we've got these three people, and in particular, it's Peter Thiel, and it's Elon, and it's Larry Page. And you talk to those three, or you listen to what they say, or you read the stuff that they write, and it's like their ambitions and aspirations for what they're trying to do are just another step up from all the rest of us. And so, the audacity, I mean, you just look at it in Elon's career, the audacity of starting an electric car company. And people not forget, like, the one thing you knew in 2005 or whenever he started it, the one kind of company you should never start in the United States is a new car company. And you know that for a fact because the last time somebody tried that was in the 1950s with Tucker, and it was such a disaster that they made a Hollywood movie about how you never want to start a new car company. And so you would never, ever do that. Like, that's just crazy. And then the other kind of company you knew you would never start would be a new rocket ship company, which would just be sheer, like, absolute unbridled lunacy, like craziness. And then, of course, you would never, ever start them at the same time, because that would just be completely nuts. And then, by the way, even if you started them, you would never get them through the financial crisis. You'd never get them through 2008 without having them go bankrupt. And now he's on the other side of that, and both of these companies are platforms for building unbelievable. I mean, the pipeline of products, literally cars and rockets. Imagine being a senior executive at a legacy car company or a legacy rocket company and watching Elon and just going, oh my God, like it was such a good gig for so long. And now this guy's got like $20 billion and he's just like coming for you. Like, it's just like, oh my God. And so I think, and he's just getting started. Like, he's what, in his mid-40s? Like, he's got another, I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know. Like, here on Earth, he's got like another 30 years.
Well, if Peter Thiel,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. If Peter Thiel can discover the cure for immortality, then he will.
They're working on it.
We have time for one more question. Sure. On Twitter, you recently said, not surprisingly, your startup is not the next WhatsApp.
Yes.
And what's great is that you actually write back to people. Someone said to you, so what is the next big thing? And you said, something new. Something new. What is something new?
So we're trying our best to find it. But the big thing is just, there is no net. Peter Thiel also talks about this. And by the way, people haven't read Peter's book. His book came out called 0 to 1. And I definitely highly recommend it. People in our industry, it's so tempting to try to find the pattern, right? Because our industry is so weird and like everything changes all the time. And so it's like, who's the next Microsoft? And then it's like, who's the next Oracle? Or who's the next, Google? Or who's the next Facebook? And the point Peter makes that I agree with is there never is one. Like, there was only one Microsoft. There will never be another Microsoft. Like, there was only one. There will never be another Google. Like, there was just the one. And it's the same thing with people look to WhatsApp, and we have founders come in all the time, and they're building the next WhatsApp, and it's like, there won't be another. Peter talks about this a lot as like everybody in the Valley thinks you want to be first to market. Peter makes the point you want to be last to market. Like, you want to be the company that closes the door and other people can't walk through. And so when there's a huge win like WhatsApp, which by the way, WhatsApp is not just a huge win financially. It's got, I don't even know, it's north of 500 million users on its way to 1 billion. Like, it's a gigantic global phenomenon. The odds of anybody flying kind of right up against them with that same strategy are really, really slim. And so it's almost certainly, there almost certainly will not be another WhatsApp, but there will be new things. When do we know about the new things? They will be viewed as completely crazy. Like, the one thing we know is nobody is going to think they're the next big thing. It's going to be something that's going to be out on the fringe. It's going to be something that's considered bizarre. You know, it's going to be software as a service in 1999, right? And everybody's going to be like, there's no way. Like, that could never possibly work. And then 10 years later, it'll be the next big thing.
The Marc Andreessen, everybody.
Good.
At TMarca on Twitter.
Thank you
so much.
Okay, good. Great job.
Which way are we going?